Welcome to Echo of Crime YouTube channel. Before he worked for the cartel, before the government called him an asset, he was just a boy who loved to fly. Barry Seal was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1939, the son of a candy salesman who spent afternoons at the local airfield watching propellers spin against the southern sky. By 17, he was already a licensed pilot. By 23, he was flying commercial jets for Trans World Airlines. Colleagues described him as fearless in turbulence, addicted to altitude. In the cockpit, he found peace, but on the ground he wanted more money, more risk, more thrill. In the early 1970s, the U.S. war on drugs tightened in the Caribbean, and a new route opened through Central America. Seal, recently suspended from TWA over alleged misconduct, saw opportunity in the chaos. He began running small contraband flights, cash, weapons, and eventually Colombian cocaine. By 1978, he was working directly with the Medellín Cartel, flying low over the Gulf of Mexico with radar evading techniques he learned in the Air National Guard. Each run could bring in more than $500,000, and Seal became a legend among traffickers. His favorite aircraft, a twin-engine Fairchild C-123 provider, could carry tons of cargo. He nicknamed it the Fat Lady, and it became his signature. What made Seal unique wasn't just his nerve, it was his precision. He landed on jungle strips no wider than a driveway, sometimes under gunfire, always calm. To the cartel, he was gold. To the DEA, he was a ghost. But around 1981, Seal's flights took an unexpected turn. Through shadowy channels, he was allegedly recruited for missions supporting U.S. operations in Central America, the same region where the Contra rebels fought left-wing governments. Officially, Seal was helping the CIA move surveillance equipment and supplies. Unofficially, the line between drugs and politics blurred beyond recognition. Documents later showed that some of Seal's airstrips overlapped with Contra training zones in Nicaragua and Honduras. When a journalist asked a retired agent how a known smuggler could work with intelligence agencies, the answer was simple: because he could fly better than anyone else, and because he didn't ask questions. For Barry, every new mission added another layer to his identity. One week, he was a smuggler, the next a government operative. His motto became, "You pay, I fly." By 1982, Seal moved operations to a quiet airstrip near Mena, Arkansas. From the outside, it looked like a rural maintenance hangar. Inside, millions of dollars worth of cocaine moved through disguised cargo planes. The town was small, the sky was wide, and few asked questions. Locals remembered him as friendly, always flashing cash, buying cars, and talking about training missions. But behind the scenes, Seal was being watched. The DEA had marked him as one of the largest drug importers in the southern U.S. In a single year, Seal's flights were estimated to have brought in over $3 billion worth of drugs, a number that caught the attention of every federal agency from Miami to Washington. Still, Seal seemed untouchable. His rumored connections to the CIA made him valuable and possibly protected. One investigator later recalled, "Every time we got close to arresting him, someone higher up told us to stand down." By 1983, Seal's empire was showing cracks. The Medellín Cartel wanted faster deliveries, while U.S. agents wanted evidence. Caught between both sides, he began living two lives, one for the money, one for survival. He bought mansions, yachts, and planes under shell companies, but paranoia crept in. He told friends he was being followed, that someone was watching from both ends. What he didn't know then was that his double life, flying for the cartels while quietly helping the U.S. government, was about to collide in the most public way possible. And the sky that made him free would soon become his trap. You can't serve two masters, not when one runs a cartel and the other runs a country. By 1983, Barry Seal was living a life few could imagine. On the surface, he was a successful pilot running a charter flight business out of Mena, Arkansas. But behind the hangar doors, he was moving thousands of kilos of cocaine for the Medellín Cartel and simultaneously meeting quietly with U.S. federal agents. The man who once defied radar now found himself playing both sides of a global war. After years of smuggling, Seal was finally arrested in Fort Lauderdale in 1983, facing a possible life sentence. He made a desperate offer to the DEA. He would become an informant. In exchange for freedom, he'd expose the inner workings of the cartel. Agents saw opportunity. Barry's charm, reputation, and aviation skill gave him access few informants could dream of. They refitted one of his planes with hidden cameras to capture evidence in flight. And soon, those cameras filmed cartel soldiers loading cocaine under the supervision of uniformed Nicaraguan military officers. The footage was explosive. For the DEA, it was proof of corruption that reached into government ranks. For Seal, it was a death warrant. In 1984, Seal's evidence was quietly passed to Washington. News leaked that the same supply routes used by U.S.-backed Contra rebels were carrying drugs north into the United States. Suddenly, Barry's cooperation wasn't just a law enforcement matter. It was political dynamite. Every agency, the DEA, CIA, and Justice Department, wanted credit for the bust, but none wanted the scandal that came with it. Seal realized he'd become what pilots fear most, a man flying blind. To one side, Colombian kingpins who believed he'd betrayed them. To the other, government operatives denying he'd ever worked for them. When a newspaper headline exposed his undercover identity in 1984, his fate was sealed. The same agencies that once protected him now stepped back into the shadows. Back in Louisiana, Barry tried to rebuild some version of his life. He kept flying, still under surveillance, often claiming he could fix his situation with one more mission. But paranoia followed him everywhere. He changed cars, homes, even routines. To friends he joked, "If I stop moving, I stop breathing." Yet each takeoff felt heavier. Every runway light reminded him that his next flight might be his last. He told one DEA contact, "If I disappear, tell my kids I wasn't the villain," foreshadowing the end. By 1985, the Medellín Cartel had sentenced him in absentia. He knew it and still refused witness protection, insisting he could handle himself. He'd flown through storms before. This one, he thought, was no different. But it was. Because, for the first time, Barry Seal couldn't outrun what was coming. Not in the air, not on the ground. When you fly too close to the clouds, sooner or later, the sky stops protecting you. By 1985, Barry Seal's name was no longer a secret. What had begun as quiet cooperation with the DEA had become a public scandal. News reports exposed him as both a drug smuggler and a government asset, a man who had supplied evidence against one of the most powerful criminal empires in the world. The Medellín Cartel, already furious over his betrayal, had a simple rule for informants: none live long. But the more dangerous truth was this: Barry Seal's story wasn't just about crime. It was about power, and those who once used him were now eager to forget he existed. After his identity leaked, Barry's world collapsed. The DEA pulled him from field work. The CIA distanced itself. His deal for protection fell apart, and the government denied responsibility for exposing his name. Friends said he became restless, frustrated, and haunted by what he knew. He often carried a briefcase full of documents, photos, flight logs, names, claiming it was insurance. He said, "If they ever come for me, the truth comes out." But no one ever saw what was inside that case. Now back in Baton Rouge, he resumed flying small charter jobs. He joked with mechanics. He smiled for reporters. But those close to him said he was a man who never stopped looking over his shoulder. He had money, power, and connections, but no one to trust. In February 1986, Seal was working under court-ordered probation after a smuggling conviction, ironically serving part of his sentence by reporting to a Salvation Army halfway house each night. It was supposed to be routine, a low-profile way to stay safe. But safety had left the equation long ago. Those who wanted him gone already knew his routine, his schedule, his car, his habits. Each night, he drove the same route through Baton Rouge, the same way he'd flown his routes through Central America. Steady, predictable, professional. He didn't know it, but his enemies were studying him like a flight plan. On the evening of February 19, 1986, Barry Seal completed his last flight, not in the air, but in history. He arrived at the halfway house just after sunset, carrying his ever-present briefcase. By night's end, the world's most notorious pilot was gone. His death was traced back to cartel associates who had followed him for weeks. The news spread fast, faster than any of his planes ever had. Headlines read, "Drug pilot turned informant found dead in Baton Rouge." To the public, he was a criminal. To his family, a complicated man who'd flown too close to too many secrets. And to those who knew the real story, he was the man who exposed how deep the lines between government, intelligence, and organized crime could blur. Within months, the DEA quietly closed his files. The CIA refused comment. Several of the cartel members involved were arrested, but none of the deeper questions about Seal's government connections were ever fully answered. In 1988, congressional hearings touched briefly on his case, but no agency claimed accountability for his exposure. His story became legend, told in documentaries, books, and films, most notably American, made starring Tom Cruise. But even Hollywood couldn't capture the truth behind Barry Seal's double life. A man who served two masters, betrayed both, and was abandoned by all. Today, the hangars of Mena Intermountain Airport still stand quiet. Locals say, on humid summer evenings, you can still hear the faint drone of propellers in the distance, echoes of the flights that changed history. Historians now view Barry Seal as a symbol of the 1980s drug war paradox, a man who became both a tool and a casualty of his era. He was proof that in the fight between nations, agencies, and cartels, the truth is the first thing that disappears. He flew for freedom. He flew for money. And in the end, he flew straight into history.